All right, season 2 of the DFL Before DNF podcast. This is a passion project for me. This whole podcast is a passion project for me. I just absolutely love people's stories and what brings them into this world of endurance sports on any level. And even the people that we've talked to in season 1 that weren't endurance athletes, like Mike Herrera of MXPX or Mickey Rayfield, who's played with Willie Nelson for 50 plus years. There's just something about someone's story that if you're an endurance athlete and you're aspiring to keep going and to go further than you've ever gone before, or go faster than you've ever gone before, that we can take something from anybody's story at any given time and apply it to ourselves, and it can motivate us to go further. Well, in my background, I've done a lot of started a lot of businesses over the last however many years, 13 or 14 years. I'm just an obsessed starter. And after my last endeavor, I wanted to get back into passion. I was in coffee for 8 years, sold that company and that roasting company, and did a private equity fund for a few years. And now I just wanted to get back into something I was passionate about. And that's where Borderlands came from. So I started Borderlands, and I still teach, and I started teaching an entrepreneur class at the University of Utah. And I thought season 2 to me would be just the most, like, the apex of enjoyment, to talk to people about how they started businesses in the world of endurance sports, generally speaking, and then specific looking at the applications at ultra running. But today I just love the energy of starters, and I love the stories of starters. And I am really excited to say I don't know much of the story of Tailwind, and I'm going to get it in real time with you. So I don't have leading questions to say, hey, tell me where this happened and how this happened. I want to know everything from Jeff and Jenny Vierling today, who started Tailwind. So before we get into the questions, first, I just want to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate you making the time. You're in Durango, Colorado. I'm in Salt Lake. We have the technology boundary, but we're still together, and thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm actually so excited to be here. Yeah.
Good. So tell me, let's go to the beginning, like the very beginning. There's a moment in every entrepreneur's story, and it comes about a different way. You either see a problem and you think, hey, that problem, I want to solve that problem. Or sometimes we start with an idea and maybe we have to go hunting for the problem. How did Tailwind start? Was it problem? You saw a problem with nutrition in endurance sports, or did you think as a product person that you found something that you think that the market needs this? Like how did it start?
It wasn't that glamorous. It was with my head in the trash can at the finish line of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. And I was puking up the muesli that I'd had for breakfast 13 hours earlier.
Wow.
And literally nothing had gotten through all day.
So nothing digested at all.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nope.
Yeah, there's a video of it on our YouTube site if anybody wants to view it.
Of the actual vomiting moment?
Jenny and our daughters were at the finish line, and she was so excited. Jenny was excited. She was like, "Come over, give me a big hug." And I'm like, nope, headed right to the trash can. And she actually got a nice, like, zoomed in close up of that. So there were a lot of people who viewed me puking on the internet. So that was the inglamorous start to the journey.
Okay, so you're vomiting, and you finish vomiting.
Yeah.
And then are you immediately thinking, I got to come up with something that's gonna better, like, make it into my system?
No, I mean, actually, my first thought was, I'm never doing this again.
Okay. Yeah, been there.
This was horrible. But it's like a lot of, like, what we call, like, type 2 fun, where like if in the next week, you go from I am never doing this again to, man, there are actually parts of that I really enjoyed, and I just want to figure out, like, how I can do this better. Then, and then I started thinking about, like, okay, my next one, right? Like, but I was like, I'm not repeating that same mistake. Obviously my nutrition did not work out for me. And, I'm a dad. Both of us had full-time jobs. And this was, I'd never done anything that big before, but I trained really hard for that race, and actually felt like my legs were fine, but my stomach wasn't. And so that was super frustrating to just put all that effort in. And really, because of those time constraints, I didn't have like other races I was preparing for. This was it. And kind of had been the focal point for better part of a year. So so I really wanted to kind of figure that out. And so I was trying really everything on the market, but I was taking a shotgun approach because I didn't really understand nutrition and how it worked. And I just wasn't really having good success in trying and finding things that would work for me. So that's where kind of my mentality and background, I guess, comes in. Like, I like to solve problems, and so I started thinking about this. Like, all right, how do I fix this for me, not for other people? So I started to dive into the medical literature about like how our bodies fuel and how we absorb fuel. And as I started to understand the mechanics of that, I was like, oh, okay, so I kind of understand why this isn't really working for me and why that's not working for me. But I didn't really see a product out there that was matching how our bodies absorb fuel, and not to challenge our digestive system at a time when it was like already under stress and strain. So that led me to just start making my own, and matching that absorption, and not having to be digested. So it was just to kind of try and solve my own problem there. And it actually worked. It worked really well.
He was doing a lot of testing in our kitchen on my grandmother's KitchenAid. And so I'd be walking into the kitchen and there'd be these clouds of dust, and I would inhale it. And you remember those pixie sticks when you were growing up? The long pixie sticks. So it was exactly like that, the smell of it. So he was just
neither of you
whipping it up on the KitchenAid and
were food scientists in any way. This was purely just started going down a rabbit hole as a curious person.
That's really it. I mean, our background was in software and technology, so kind of a technical background, but not a food chemistry kind of background. I did grow up. My parents were physicians, so I'd grown up around medical speak, pretty much my whole life. So
was that in Colorado?
That helped a lot. I've kind of lived in a lot of different places, but the bulk of my time that when I was growing up was in the Denver area, and just had always been. I'm a mountain person. I just love being outdoors, and that's what one of the things that Jenny and I have very much in common.
Yeah. So Jenny, I did just a little bit of background, and I think that I see that you went to Michigan. University of Michigan. You have some connection to Michigan. Were you born and raised Colorado?
Go Blue. I just had to say that because of our football team. But
it's been a few years.
It's been a good year for football, a bad year for basketball, but that's okay. Anyways, so like Jeff, I've lived in multiple places. So Utah actually. Moved to Utah, I guess, in 5th grade. And then went to school at Michigan, spent some time in Missouri, went back to school at Michigan for graduate school, and then ended up in Washington State where I met Jeff. And then we both moved to Colorado. We drove through and we put down roots, and we just fell in love with Durango.
So you were marketing background. Did I see that correctly? Like that's your expertise, your realm. Jeff, how would you characterize your realm of expertise prior to starting Tailwind?
I guess we kind of talk about it like I'm a little more back of the house and Jenny's kind of front of the house, and
Yep.
I'm a little more like I liked kind of digging in and experimenting and the operational side, like kind of figuring out how to make it and
Yeah.
the how to part of it. Yeah.
And then, all right, so you guys, Washington, moved to Colorado, and then you're in Colorado. You've got your day jobs. Then you throw up in a can. And are you at, and you start researching, and there's pixie dust flying around. At what point did you start to pass it along to friends and say, hey, try this out? Or was that your next step? Like, hey, this is kind of working for me. I've tried this. I've been tinkering. Here, friends.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah. So I was experimenting on myself, and I thought it worked pretty well, but also have a group that I was as a Thursday bike and beer group, and so I started sharing this with them, and I just wanted to get their opinions, and they really liked it, and kind of kept coming back asking for more. So like I was, it's a white powder. This is what became our endurance fuel. But so it's a white powder, and so I was mixing it in the KitchenAid, and I was putting it into Ziplocks, and then meeting people in parking lots to hand off baggies of white powder.
Yeah. The good kind.
Not sketchy at all.
Yeah.
There was one person who got like 5 bags of it, and we put it in his truck, and then we kind of looked at each other, and he's like, yeah, I think I should put a blanket over that. I'm like, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So definitely pretty sketchy.
You're just giving it to them at this point, though, right? You're not selling it to them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just giving it to them. But the feedback was really positive. Like they kind of kept coming back and saying, hey, this is the best stuff I've ever used. Can I get some more? And at the same time, I continued to try and get over the hump at Leadville. And there was a forum of people there. So I tossed it out to that group. I was like, hey, I've been working on this thing, and it's helping me. Does anybody else have this kind of problem with nutrition in the race? And would you like to try it? And there was one woman that I'd met there through Leadville, and she had dropped out of 7 races, 700 milers. Okay. And it was just all for her was nutrition related. Like she just could not get her stomach to function well enough to get through. And so I sent her some of this, and she emailed a couple months later and said she had finished the Shenandoah 100, and her stomach felt great the whole day.
Nice.
And she broke down in tears as she crossed the finish line because she had finally achieved this life goal, right? Like she'd been at it for almost a decade.
Wow.
And I think that was when Jenny and I looked at each other and we're like, hey, we know this works pretty well and people like it, but if it could help somebody achieve a goal, then that's something that we could maybe build around.
Oh, you could, yeah.
And that's
so Jenny,
something
is your marketing brain starting to wake up at this point? Like, oh my goodness, we have this incredible success story. Can we start to tell these stories, or like what's happening in your brain as the back of the house Jeff is developing a product that's really genuinely useful?
Well, it's funny, he had started riding with it and being the supportive wife. I was like, oh yeah, you keep riding with your stuff and I'll keep riding with mine. Yeah. And then I had a horrible experience at the Leadville Silver Rush where my stomach had basically shut down as well. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. And there's a 100-miler of from Telluride to Moab. And so I went ahead and I did that race, and I ran strictly on Jeff's powder, and it was awesome. I just couldn't believe it. Like I had no stomach issues at all.
And that was 100% of what you consumed, or was it like supplemental with something else?
It was 100%, straight 100%. Wow. And so that made me a personal believer. And then that coupled with the story from this woman, I was like, wow, there was a noticeable shift in my mind of, we really have something special here that can help a lot of people, because coming from an endurance sports background, and it's like when you're running on the trail, what do you always end up talking about nutrition, right? Or at the end of a bike ride, we always end up talking about nutrition and, oh God, my stomach was knots, and I wish I could solve this. So, so I think that's when we started down that path. And Jeff, I forget when you sold your business that you were working on, and we decided to go more into Tailwind. And at the time I was doing consulting work so I could bring in some cash flow. So we just started down this path, and the big test was, would people buy it? And then would they come back and would they buy it again? And they did.
So your first round, then sounds like, if I'm hearing correctly, you self-funded it. From my experience in grocery items, like within coffee, we were doing cold brews and coffee on the shelf. There's a lot of licensing for, and I don't know that you're a potentially hazardous food. You could maybe tell me that if you are, but how was licensing, on something like this? Were you working with the FDA? Were they regulating? Who did you have to satisfy in order to be able to, transact with this product?
Well, okay, so you can probably appreciate this as an entrepreneur, that you try and do the best you can with the resources that you have available. Absolutely, but you don't have infinite resources. And that's right, what we did in that first launch was pretty small scale, and we really just kind of threw up a website, and then also got a real shot in the arm from a local store here, Mountain Bike Specialists in Durango, and the owner of that asked us to come in and talk about what we were doing with his staff. And at the end of that, he was like, "Okay, I'm going to place an order for $400 worth." And then we're like, "Oh, well, I guess we need to go get some packaging and figure that out." So yeah, we were making it in our shop. The health department rules locally, you could work with what's called a commissary, which would be a commercial kitchen that that you could basically borrow. And so we worked with a local restaurant on that. The truth of it is that most of what we were doing was not actually in that commercial kitchen, but that was our official home. And because we're dealing with a powder, and it's a dry powder, there was not really there really is no significant microbial risk. So today we're regulated by CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They regulate us, and then also the FDA. But we're pretty low risk on the totem pole of things. They worry a lot more about meat processing and those kinds of products than powders, because it's just not a hospitable environment for things to grow. So the licensing side of it was, I would say we were skirting it a little bit at the beginning. But
been there.
That was one of our big steps to move.
I mean, you do what you can do with the resources that you have. And so we literally started in our backyard. I remember there was somebody, like a customer, who came to Durango, and they went to the local store and they said, "Hey, we want to visit the Tailwind facility." And so they gave them our number. and I was like, well,
they showed up at our house.
And they came over, and we had them for dinner, and we had a lot of laughs. It's like, welcome to Tailwind's world headquarters right here. And so we had some laughs over that. But we were basically, it's the classic entrepreneur story where you're literally working out of your house, and we were shipping out of our house. And our mail person was really excited because they got incented for extra packages that they had to bring back to the main postal office. And so as our business grew, she was getting more and more compensation. And if you go way back into our history, like our Facebook posts, you'll see a friend of ours, Rich, he had this little mini, and it was really exciting because he filled the entire mini with packages over the Labor Day weekend, and which is like all of like 20 packages. But to us, that was huge. And you know, there was a guy that we met with early on, and he told us, and I think it's absolutely true. He said, remember this time at the very beginning, because these are really special moments that that you'll remember forever, and they really form the foundation of your business. And I would say that's absolutely true. Those early years, I look back on very, very fondly. I mean, heck, we had our friends' sons who were in high school at the time, writing notes and shipping out our packages that first summer, when it was kind of this big giant beta test. And it was really a special time.
I think of those early days kind of like when you have kids, and it's like you think, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, how am I doing this? And then they get a little bit older and you're like, you know, those were good days. Like, you'll never have those days back. And those are like some of the, the fondness, and you don't realize it when you're in it, because you think, God, wouldn't it be great if we had a bigger facility? Wouldn't it be great if we had more access to capital? Wouldn't it be better if our packaging was cooler, if we had more athletes? But then once you have all that, and you know, you can tell me if this is true or not, then you look back and think it was really sweet those days. Like, it's nice. Those days were sweet because it succeeded. We've had a business, we had a bookstore and a tea shop. Once we've started 13 restaurants here in Salt Lake City, and we had a tea shop and a bookstore that was really sweet times when it was happening, and it was successful in every way except money. And money is the way we keep score in business, and that's is what it is. And it failed. So I don't look back at that as fondly as I look back at, you know, those early days of coffee roasting. But to me, all of it feels like having kids. And when you're stressed and one's crying and another one needs a diet, and you think, God, I just can't wait for them to get older. And then they're older, and you're like, I kind of miss those days. Those were good days.
Yeah, I think that's really true. That the first mixer, so the KitchenAid didn't last too long. It was too slow. So bought a mixer. They could do about 100 pounds at a time, but the motor was $800. So Jenny was like, well, you could just do the hand crank model, right? So
because it was
and it's a better story.
So I'd sit there and do like, it's a better story. I do like 50 cranks, and then like shake it out, and then do like another 50 cranks.
Get some cardio.
And you know, I made a sifter. I needed to like sift the ingredients so that there weren't any clumps. So, you know, I made that out of some stainless steel mesh, and like cannibalized a random orbit sander and hooked the motor onto it, and so it would vibrate, and then I could pour things through.
Nice.
It worked great.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was a lot of fun trying to figure out, you know, how do we do this? How do we scale it a little bit?
And you probably would appreciate this coming from the coffee roasting industry. So we actually had our first packaging. We would order the bags from a bag supplier that was really for coffee.
Bags,
that were coffee bags. And we had this funnel, and then we would weigh out the powder, and then pour the funnel into the bag, and then heat seal it.
Yep.
So it's a very manual, laborious process.
I'm actually in the back of a large coffee roasting warehouse right now.
That's what we had to do.
And as I walked in, that's exactly what they were doing. They're nicer bags than when I owned it, but you know, they were doing that's exactly what I just watched them doing. That's funny. So, you know, as you're in that what is romantic now, because things, you know, have appeared to have grown nicely. Year one, you know, you probably haven't, I'm just guessing, like maybe no full-time employees yet. It's perhaps just you two. And, you know, there's this book called the E-Myth, which is the book I've passed across the table more than any other, the myth of the entrepreneur. And that is, if you're a good plumber, then you should start a plumbing business, which is absolutely incorrect. If you're a good plumber, you should be a plumber. And if you're good at business, then you should start the business and find the plumber to partner with. So as you're, you know, in those growing pains of year one, and what I'm calling year one is the first 12 months that you're actually transacting, taking money in exchange for your product. Talk about those, when did you start to feel the growing pains? Or maybe put another way, when did you start to think, oh, this could be exponential? You know, was there a particular aha moment that like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think the way the way it felt to me was I could feel it in terms of like how much powder I was making, and things like pallets of pallets of ingredients showing up on our driveway. Um,
Ah,
that it just got bigger, and I started having to think about like, how do I haul all this stuff around, and like, oh, there's a lot of lifting involved in this process. So that was an indicator, I think. But the
yeah,
coolest thing was, because we were really direct to consumer, via our website, and
yeah.
and we had pretty low volume. We could really, like, we were carrying on conversations with our customers, and hearing what they
Nice.
were doing, and it was like so surpassing what Jenny and I could do as athletes.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
that it was kind of humbling and also super cool to see. It's like, oh, okay, this is really neat that it's helping people do extraordinary things. Um,
yeah.
so I think we were pretty optimistic. That's my recollection of it. But we were still pretty small. We weren't paying ourselves. We were just trying to,
Not yet. Yeah,
not yet, right?
yeah,
Make enough to be able to keep ordering and keep
yeah,
keep the supplies going. Yeah.
yeah.
I think for it's funny, we have I actually kept a document to outline year by year the different
Oh,
milestones that
great.
we reached, and
Oh, that's awesome.
just in terms of number of orders. And
Yeah.
we we were so lucky because when we first started Tailwind, social media was just happening, and so Facebook was where it was at, and it was a forum at that time for people to really share their experiences and stories.
Yeah.
And being a very small company with no marketing budget, um, we found that people were telling their stories and sharing their experiences
Mm,
with Tailwind.
hmm.
And that was the best thing ever because we
Yeah.
saw who our customers were, and
Yeah.
we could interact with them and get feedback and just follow the growth of our product
Yeah.
among these different groups in Facebook. And
Yeah.
so, I have to say that, and this is still true today, because we have this product called the Tailwind Challenge, and we send out good luck emails, and then people will write back and tell us about their experiences. But
Oh, that's
Sundays
cool.
and Mondays were always my favorite days because that's when we'd hear back from our customers about the
Hmm.
experiences that they had, that being able
Wow.
to accomplish things that they never thought were possible. And then we started hearing about these off-label uses for like the woman going through labor. Like, it's
Oh,
great
interesting.
for a woman going through labor. Yeah, because you're essentially running a marathon when you're going through labor. Or people who are
Fascinating.
using it for colonoscopies because you need a clear liquid. And so we were
Yeah.
just gathering these different stories that were so cool and inspiring to us. So that was, yeah. So that
That's
was
great.
another special period of time because I think
Yeah.
social media today is a bit different. Back then, it was really a platform for people to share these stories, and they were
Yeah.
very genuine and real.
Yeah. That's super cool. So as you are making this move and you're seeing the growth and you have the off-label uses and all of that sort of stuff and the money starts to come in, this is somewhat overgeneral. It depends on cost of ingredients and all that, but kind of a rule of thumb is that if you're growing more than 20% year over year, then the cash that comes from operations isn't enough to sustain that growth. And so I'm guessing with the way that you guys have grown, there was a lot of need for capital along the way. I mean, did you guys ever bring on partners during those big growth? I mean, during big growth years, were there partners? Were there mortgaging of houses? Like, what was the risk looking like in order to bring in the money necessary to continue to expand the product?
Well, we were really fortunate to meet an advisor early on,
Uh-huh.
who also invested a relatively small amount, but at the time it was important for us.
Yep.
Um, and and his experience was with craft and Nabisco, like CPG food. So he's still part of our team, and that's been a real advantage for us in helping us kind of figure out like how do we scale and how do we navigate that. We did so there've been a lot of changes, obviously. That first step that our advisor kind of hooked us up with was to partner with another food company, and that was in Dolores, which is about 45 minutes outside of Durango. And they had a commercial kitchen, and they had some extra space, and they had employees who had some downtime in their process. So we could share those employees and share some of their time.
Amazing.
And so that was kind of a first big move. And because of all those factors, it wasn't like a hugely expensive move for us, which was great. Because we didn't have, like you said, we didn't have a lot of money to make it work.
It was the equivalent of a bay in a garage, essentially.
Yeah, basically a garage bay. Yeah.
Nice. And we were continuing to ship out of the house, but then the production moved over to that facility in Dolores, and we would do a forecast every week, and then we drive over in our truck and pick up the finished product and bring it back to the house so that we could ship it out.
So that lasted, by the end of a year there, we'd taken over that entire space. The other food company kind of died out, and moved, and we'd taken on the employees.
What an amazing,
incredible
way.
That was a big jump
to get that. I mean, that's, if so many people have to invest in the machinery and invest in the kitchen and do the construction and do the build out, what an incredible on-ramp for you, not to celebrate the demise of this other company, because, clearly that was probably challenging for that entrepreneur, but for you to be in that position that, I mean, am I right? Did that feel like, wow, what a nice way to ease into it without a major amount of risk?
Yeah. It was a really fortunate, experience. And it's also a little bit of reflection of like doing business in a town like Durango and a mountain area where everybody tries to help each other.
Cool.
So it was pretty cool. And that let us kind of bridge that gap, that initial gap anyways. And that, I don't know how we would have done it otherwise, honestly.
Yeah, that's special. That's cool.
And we were continuing to trying to be really conservative in terms of, really valuing every penny. So I remember there was a bank, and they would shred their documents. And so we started using those shredded documents as filling for our boxes. And
amazing.
And then we transitioned to the newspaper. So the newspaper, they would print their newspapers on these giant reels of paper, but they always had leftover reels from newspaper to newspaper. So we would drive down to Farmington, and we would gather all these extra rolls of paper and bring them back to our facility to use as filling when we were shipping out product. So we were constantly trying to figure out how can we continue to be conservative to safeguard our cash flow to fund the business.
And was that trash
and be sustainable with resources?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It was trash for them. So we were able to reuse something, which was pretty cool.
That's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying there's a sustainability aspect, which has been important to us all the way through, is like try and make use of waste if we can. And so that was a nice way to do that. And it was free. So
that's cool.
You got to be scrappy as an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah. I mean, assuming you have left your house at this point, what year did you leave your house in terms of it being a fulfillment center? Like when did that benchmark in your story happen?
So that was in Dolores.
Do you remember? I mean, it was when we were in Dolores, we started to ship out of that facility. So that would have been probably 2014.
14?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
2014.
2014. Yeah. But we were also rapidly outgrowing that space. And that was back actually in that 2014 time period was when we had a customer that was ordering. I guess they'd been exposed to the product in the U.S., but then they live in Australia, and they approached us about sending product to Australia and then starting to distribute it there. So we picked up our first international partner at that time.
That's cool.
Which was pretty cool, and then we leaned on some local businesses to help us figure out how you actually pack a pallet and ship it overseas. So so we were starting to get like, bigger volumes, and then started that international expansion even back then. So we were pretty rapidly running out of space, and that's when we started looking for our next space.
Wow.
And I would say,
go ahead.
Looking back on it, I was just going to say that one of the defining moments for us, talking about podcasts, is we were on a podcast with Trail Runner Nation that to me really introduced Tailwind to the trail running world. And we were actually up at Leadville, and the podcast was coming out. And then we just started seeing a couple of orders coming in from that podcast. And, Don and Scott were just
a flood of orders.
Really? That's awesome.
So I point to them really as introducing us to the trail running market, and they had learned about us from Sunny Blend. Yeah. It's neat.
Well, tell me, what did the competitive landscape look like for you? There's a lot of powders out there. One of the things being fairly new to Tailwind, other than sometimes, it seems like you had a strategy to sponsor races along the way or to, provide product for aid stations. But as I started to really, so my story is that by the time this releases, we'll know how I did at my 9th 100-mile attempt. I've DNF'd 7. I've finished 1. And this podcast, season 1 of this podcast was my journey to my 100-miler. So as we record this, it's before the 100-mile. This will release after, and so the world may know that, who knows. But
all right,
this is the first time I did a really deep dive into nutrition. And there's a nutritionist named Jesse Rich that I had on the podcast, and I love the way he presents nutrition information. And he had talked about Tailwind, and he had talked about like how many carbs he's recommending per hour for a 100-mile effort for, for me, like 70 to 80, is it grams? I'm sorry, I don't know. It's 70 to 80
grams,
probably grams. Okay. Per hour is what I'm going to be targeting at this race. And he thinks that'll be the difference maker, because our brains our brains take 30% of the calories we consume in order to keep that high functioning brain even capable of making a good decision. So I was nutrient deficient, and so now I'm hoping to give my brain what it needs so I can make the decision to keep going forward, because if I don't, then the reptile brain takes over, and the last thing it wants to do is keep going forward. And so my strategy going into this race is heavily is all Tailwind for me, supplementing with some like food. And then once I get up to high mileage, I haven't tried Tailwind north of 50 miles. So I don't know what's going to happen at that point, but I've got my plan. But as Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face. So we'll see how that goes. But so that was my deep dive into where Tailwind came into my story. So if in the ultra running world, where I think it's beneficial, and I don't know biking, so maybe this is the same, but in ultra running, if we eat a lot of even good whole foods over the course of 100 miles, over the course of 20, 30, 40 hours, sometimes we're very weighed down. Why I am so excited about this is that it's light. And so, in terms of weight, it's not going to weigh my body down, but it's going to give me the calories and the carbs that I need to keep fighting. So as you've developed clearly a unique product with a clear understanding sort of the biology connected with, marketing. Like, there's great products out there that don't get traction. And unfortunately, there's not so great products out there that do get traction because of good marketing. And so here we're looking at what seems like great product, great marketing. So as Jeff is, articulating the sort of long list of why the value proposition, the advantageous for me as an athlete taking it. Jenny, how are you packaging this to the public? Like, you're getting traction because of its performance, no doubt, like it's working, but how are you getting new people to try it as you're in these exponentially growing years?
I really have to credit our customers. It was really a grassroots efforts. When we were online only, and we would always ask the question of how did you hear about Tailwind? 99% of the time they heard about it through people whom they knew who had had great experiences with the product. And I think that coupled with the social media at work, with people just sharing their stories. I remember getting a call from someone, it was just prior to the Boston Marathon. And somehow she got my number and I picked it up.
Wow.
And we started talking. She goes, I don't know if you know this, but you are just blowing up on Facebook in this group. And I'm like, really? Wow. And so I joined the group and sure enough. And we let our customers tell the story for us. We felt that was really the most authentic and best way, because when you hear it from a friend, you're going to go ahead and try it. And then because the product works, then you are converted and you become a customer. Yeah. So I really have to credit our customers. And at that time, people were approaching us also about how can we help? How can we support you? And so we came up with what we called our Trailblazer program, where we identified some folks who are really involved in their community, who are passionate about our products, because going back to our original why of helping people achieve their goals, we helped these people achieve their goals and they wanted to share that with people whom they knew. And I think you really see that in the ultra running and endurance communities, where it's not about the podium. It's about that journey and that experience and helping other people. So like I always talk about how on randonneuring, which is a form of long bicycle riding, if you get a flat, you pull off to the side of or if somebody gets a flat, you pull off to the side of the road and you help that person fix their flat. And I think that's just part of the endurance community, trying to help one another out. And so, so again, a credit to our customers and the early trailblazers. And then we started getting calls from retailers, from people in a retail setting who heard about it through their customers. And then we would say, well, we'll go ahead and we'll send you our product, but we really want you to test it out first and make sure that it meets your expectations and that it aligns with what your product assortment is, because we don't want to just sell you on something and have it just sit on the shelf. We really want you to believe in the product. And so we started doing that. And so because of that, we were able to expand into retail, and we had these folks at the stores who used our product who would always talk about our product with people who walked through the door. So that also helped. And then to your point, events, I still remember Scotty Mills, and he called about having us at the San Diego 100. And we sent him this box and it was filled with Ziploc bags filled with white powder. We didn't have event bags. So we were just using the gallon size Ziplocs. And we're like, well, how many do you need? Yeah. And we sent them to him. And and the other thing that he kind of set the standard for is he wanted to test our product before putting it out at the San Diego 100. So he wanted to use it himself. And so he tested it out and it met his expectations. And so we started incorporating that into our event strategy as well, is that before we supported an event, we wanted the race director to use it to make sure that it met their expectations. And that's how we started popping up at these different events, as people would reach out to us and we'd say, we'll send you some product. And so, so through a couple of different avenues, which really comes back to people telling other people.
So you didn't have to have an outbound strategy, it sounds like, for a long time, or maybe never. Like you were constantly inbound, like people were always coming to you and you were growing. Like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but somewhat reactionary. It's like, hey, we're servicing all of the customers. This is great. And then all of a sudden someone else comes to you and it's like, oh my gosh, well, we don't want to say no. We want to fulfill this, but whoa, this is bigger than we were expecting. Was there ever a point where you got production to where it needed to be, where you had capacity and it was like, hey, we've got room to grow. We're going to go outbound now. We're going to call REI. We're going to, was there a point in which you shifted from inbound to outbound?
we think that every single year, like, oh my gosh, we finally built a capacity, right?
Yeah.
And then something happens, and then we feel like, that's the hard part. Constantly being
still,
in reactive mode.
Yeah. I mean, it was true, like, especially with the retailers, that for a while it was really driven by the retailers themselves reaching out. And then we were like, okay, well, now we have enough of these that we need to have like a retail program. So we then invested in hiring a sales director who could work with retailers and put together more of a formal process. Like now we have sell sheets and price lists and those kinds of collateral, and somebody's we're thinking about how the products look together on the shelf, and what's the easiest way to explain it to people. And so it's gotten more formal as the years have gone on, for sure. And we've invested in those areas too.
And did you ever start a like formal elite ultra athlete of any kind sponsorship program, like a partnership program? Are you working with elite runners at this point?
That's another one that happened somewhat organically, where we, I think Jenny and me, like we're both like very average athletes. Well, maybe me more than Jenny. She's maybe more accomplished than I am. But we've always identified with the people that are out there for the enjoyment of it and for the love of it, and that are competitive, but maybe with themselves or with their own goals, versus being like, really, really podium seekers. And we also didn't have, because we were grassroots and we weren't backed by a big money. We didn't have the money to go out and try and, recruit elite athletes to represent our brand. And that was also competitively, we felt like everybody else was doing that, and that we should focus on the 98, 99% of people who are doing it for the love of the sport. And if we can help those people, then
and that's really where our heart was great. Too. Because we know what it's like to be out there for a long time. So
and like the longer you're out there is actually just the longer you're out there, right? It's easier if you're out there for a shorter time.
I've had this discussion a lot lately, like that the people who run fast, I always say this, I would trade it to be a podium finisher. I would love to be a podium finisher. I am so far from that, but that, let's take Western States. Jim Walmsley's only out there for 14 hours. If I'm doing it, I'm out there for 30. That's a very different activity than what
my easiest. Leadville was my fastest.
Yes. Makes sense.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
And it's not to say they don't push themselves hard, and
absolutely,
like Jeff said, the athletes whom we support, it was actually organically where they reached out to us. They had tried our product and it worked for them, and they reached out to us and say, hey, I really like your product. I tried it. And then my reply was very similar to the retailer. So I said, well, that is great, but let me give you product for 6 months and try it, test it out to the max, to the limits, and come back to me after 6 months. And let's talk then, because we really wanted to make sure that they were actually using the product and deriving benefit from it.
Not just looking for a business relationship before they really could be a testimony to the product.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So that authenticity is super important for us. And so, the athletes that we work with, behind Jenny is Courtney DeWalter, and she was introduced to Tailwind by a friend, and then had been using it for a while, and till before we started working with her. And that's been a fun partnership because she's super creative, and also I think just she just has such a great attitude towards the sport and towards the people that are participate.
She fits the vibe of the 99%, like we're talking about. Like she
right, she does,
that, but she's just a really fast version of it who happens to win. But
exactly.
She's kind of old school.
Yeah. Like almost accidentally, she's incredibly fast.
Oh, well, I'm winning everything, but I'm just here because I love it.
Taking nothing away from her, right? But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's been a fun partnership because we developed a flavor together, and
cool.
And that was something that we released last year, and and people loved it. So
is it still
so
available?
we're going to do more of that. Let's say that. It was a limited edition last year for a limited period of time, and it was pretty successful. So I think we're hoping to make that available again to people.
Cool. Well, what's the future of Tailwind? Like, do you guys still? So there comes a point, at least for me, when I was running the coffee roasting company and we did wholesale, retail, grocery to all the cafes. I loved it, but there came a point where I just lost my imagination for it. And my director of operations had a massive imagination for it, and he wanted to buy it from me. And so it was great to pass it on to the person who'd been making it work. So, I mean, there comes a point in the entrepreneurial life where, you have ups and downs. Like I have imagination for a future and I don't, but for me, it got to the point where it's like, I don't have it and I don't think I'm going to get it again. Where's your imagination at for Tailwind right now? Like, it just seems like if you wanted to, your head could be down working in the business all the time because of the organic growth. Do you have the time to step back and work on the business instead of in the business? And if so, what's your imagination like for the future of Tailwind right now?
Jenny, do you want to start?
No, that's a really good question. I think when I think about our future, I always go back to the why of why we started Tailwind in the first place. And it truly was to help people achieve their goals. And so as long as Tailwind continues to deliver on that mission and that why, it's very invigorating and very inspirational for us. Sure, there are, those days when you're like, oh my God, but, for every entrepreneur, I would also say that when we started Tailwind, our goal was to build a community asset. And I think one of the things that really differentiates Tailwind from other companies is that we actually manufacture our own product here in Durango, Colorado.
Yeah, that is
and
cool.
So it is locally manufactured. We fulfill it here. We give back to our community in a lot of different ways, and that's very fulfilling also to be able to create this community asset and have it be sustainable. So in the future, at some point, Jeff and I will be like, I'm pushing 60 pretty soon here. So, at some point we'll be like, okay, so what are our personal next steps? But the goal is that, there's a team in place that can continue to carry forth with the original why of Tailwind Nutrition. That's very, very important to us.
And how do you articulate?
And I would say, like,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to add on to that. For me, like, I'm definitely feeling the weight of that, and in terms of just like there's so much to do, and that struggle between being heads down, working in the business versus on the business. So that is something that we are actively trying to build the team and bring in people that that can fill some of those roles that some of those hats that both of us have been wearing for a long time, but and then with the eye towards freeing us up to work on the things that we really enjoy in the business. Like I still really love working on new products, and if I could spend more of my time doing just that, like that would be terrific. So that's the strategy, is to try and fill some of those roles with people that are bringing energy and bringing enthusiasm, and then allow us to focus more on the parts of the business that we really enjoy.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, as we kind of maybe as a conclusion here, if I think of like by the numbers, like when you think about hey, Tailwind, like if you ever, sometimes it's hard to look up and be like, oh my gosh, look what we've done. Like sometimes I try and avoid that in my business endeavors, because if I stop and look up, I might be like, oh, this is good enough to just stop. I should just stop. This is great. But as you think about, like, you're encouraged by what you've built, like, are there certain like metrics that you're open to share to be like, hey, we're in 5 continents, or, we're in all 50 states in retail. Like, we're in REI. Are there certain metrics that when you just like pause and let yourself be proud of what you've built that come to mind?
I think, it's interesting. We are available around the world in close to 45 countries.
Oh my gosh,
and
that's cool.
When I look back at, what we've built here at Tailwind, I refer to it as a Tailwind family.
Yeah.
And all the partners and the customers who have touched our lives in such positive ways, to me, that's the metric that I look at. Like if we don't continue to do that, then it's not so much fun, right?
Yeah.
So for me, on a very personal level, that positive feedback is so important. And that's when I look back and I see what we've built and the lives that we've been able to touch with Tailwind and what we have received in return. That's a pretty awesome metric. So
yeah, that's cool. Mm-hmm. Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, and I think we built out a new manufacturing facility at the second half of 2022 and into the first part of 23, and I still, like, when I walk through there and I just think about the hand crank mixer to this, like, kind of really cool facility, and see the scale of it. And, it's a little like that Indiana Jones scene where they're like, that it's maybe not quite that big, but the archive warehouse at the end where they're looking and seeing those like endless stacks of product. And it's like, it's kind of like that. Like, you're like, wow, it's so impressive.
Right.
And that's actually really cool. It makes me feel like, well, we set out to try and do something that would benefit the community of athletes and our local community. And I feel like we've been able to do that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that is cool. Well, what I've loved about Tailwind, just as a consumer, what made me reach out to want to hear more of your story is that that Mandarin, which that's all I do. I just love that Mandarin. I don't get flavor fatigue.
That was the first flavor.
It's the first flavor I made for myself because I really like it. Yep.
It's so good. But what I love about it is that there's no flavor fatigue for me. I haven't experienced flavor fatigue yet. Of course, like I said, I haven't taken it over 50 miles yet, to be determined. But I like that it's colorless, like that there's no like coloring in it of any kind. I love the I love that. And I love that I haven't gotten tired of it, even though it's been like on long runs. It's been the only thing I've consumed by and large, with a little bit of other items. It feels like I can take it for the long haul. And by the time this airs, we'll know. But Jeff and Jenny, I just want to thank you for your time today, and for yes, thank you, and for sharing your story. And I'm hopeful, for your future. I love hearing what you're up to. I love hearing what you're proud of with your story, and that you're still, thinking about continuing on, and the things that made you happy early on with customer, let's say, testimonials, that stuff still motivates you and gets you excited. I think that's special. So all the best of luck to you, and as you continue to grow and handle all that inbound growth that's coming your way.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh, and good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I can't wait.
Can't wait to see how it turns out.
Wait. I've got a big box.
May there be a Tailwind at your back the entire way.
Yeah. Yes, and in my water bottle. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.